Hello and welcome to our Advent edition of Behind the Pulpit. This is our second Sunday of Advent, the day of peace. Also the day when we look to the prophecies and the prophets that talk about preparing the way of the Lord that guide us in the ways of peace. And so this Sunday we'll be lighting the second candle of the second purple candle. So last Sunday we lit the candle of hope. And then this Sunday we meditate and light on and pray on the candle of peace. And just by looking at the news all around us, peace is definitely in short supply. And we need to be the ones that live that out and prepare that way for peace. And so we will be lighting that second candle, that second purple candle of peace. And I want to say thank you to my lovely wife, Rachel, and Sammy and John Luke for leading us in our liturgy this coming Sunday. And then what we're going to do is you're going to see our opening hymn is It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. And the reason why we're going to sing that is it talks about peace on earth and goodwill to men. Again, a call to being prepared to live in a time of peace and to be the ones who bear peace. We won't be talking about it this Sunday, but in the Sermon of the Mount, one of those that are blessed or happy are the peacemakers. And in fact, Paul teaches in the New Testament that we are ambassadors of reconciliation. And so we're going to look at that reminder that we need to be the bearers of the peace of Christ and that we need to be at the forefront of peacemaking and reconciliation. So It Came Upon a Midnight Clear has that familiar refrain of peace on earth, goodwill towards men. And so, which brings us to our responsive reading this Sunday. It's a responsive reading that is called Practical Christianity. And again, it just that if we are truly transformed people, if we are truly people of Christ and disciples of Jesus, then it should be reflected in our everyday interactions. It's so easy to look at the extremes that sometimes we overlook our own interactions of how we fail to live out in our day-to-day interactions as disciples of Christ. And again, it's a call to remind us that we are witnesses. And so our hymn of confession is a little strange, but it's an interesting one where it's an old Christmas hymn called I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. And some of you might actually know it quite well. But the story, pay attention to the story or the message of I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day, because it'll continue to end on this song or this message of peace on earth, goodwill towards men. And in the story, the listener hears the Christmas bells and is reminded of the story and wonders how anybody could possibly play a song or a message in a world of darkness and of hate, and yet the listener hears those bells pealing again and again and again. And I think it's a great hymn of confession for us to understand that we are to be those bells on Christmas Day. We ought to be out there ringing and singing and proclaiming that Jesus Christ is the Prince of Peace and that he came to this world through his Father to redeem and reconcile all things. And we need to continue to ring and sing that message of peace. And so that's why we will be singing that as our hymn of confession. And so our scriptures, as we continue, we're going to look at the scripture of Malachi, the prophet Malachi, chapter 3, 1 through 4, and then we'll look at two pieces of the Gospel of Luke. First, we'll look at Luke 1, 68 through 79, which is the prophecy that Zechariah has, that's the father of John the Baptist, of a prophecy of his son. And then later we will see in Luke 3, 1 through 6, a little bit of the beginning of John the Baptist's prophecy and ministry. And what's interesting in all of these, in Malachi, in Zechariah's prophecy, and then later with John the Baptist, is that there's this emphasis on preparing the way of the Lord. And what's really interesting to note is that Malachi refers to a refiner's fire, refers to making things straight and purified and beautiful again. And Zechariah talks about prophesying for a son who will begin to prepare for the ways of peace. And then we move to John, who continues to talk about preparing a way, making crooked paths straight. But what's interesting in all this is there's an emphasis on preparing the way for peace. And so part of the sermon we'll be talking about how we are called to prepare the path for peace, and how our actions, if they are not in line with the way that Christ has taught us to live our lives, then we can be counter to that peace. And I'll be reflecting also on the Hebrew word shalom. Shalom, which often is translated as peace in the Old Testament, also means wholeness or completeness or healing or community. There's all sorts of things going on with that word peace. And then finally, so the question is, what are the ways in which we, as we live our lives, prepare for the way of peace? Or are we living our lives in a way that is counter to preparing for that way of peace? And so that's what our reflection is this Sunday. And then our closing hymn will be Wonderful Peace. Again, you'll hear the same refrain again and again of how we ask for God's peace to come upon us so that it can outpour beyond us. And so as God pours his peace and his love and joy into us, we have a responsibility to share that with the rest of the world. So be like the bell on Christmas Day that continually rings out in this dark world, this call for preparation for peace and preparing the way of the Lord. Look forward to seeing you all this Sunday, and have a great weekend.